Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining our LinkedIn Live today. Trust is the new ROI, winning buy in when everyone's guard is up. I'm Marc Wolfe. I'm an author, executive coach, and I'm professionally curious. I love questions, but I even love the answers even better. Let me introduce our co hosts today. We have three guys together here for your entertainment, enjoyment, and learning opportunities. Dave, introduce yourself.
Dave O'Brien. I would have said professionally curious, but I'm writing that down because I am professionally borrowing that from you, Marc Wolfe. Dave O'Brien, helping people on the people side, culture side, developing high performance teams for all of my career, which we shall not mention how long that's been because I prefer to think I lost my hair early in life and I'm still young. Wally.
Hey, thanks, Dave, and thanks, Mark. Wally Burchfield, been in the auto industry for basically my entire life. I'm the oldest guest on the call here, but I love people. I love problem solving, and like Dave and Mark, I'm very curious when I hear people with struggles. And is there a way to help? I love to help. I'm a people person, and I love to help. So this will be fun talking about trust today.
I think when we think about trust, right, no one wants your help until they actually know and trust you well enough. Because I've offered help to some strangers and they don't actually act on it immediately. I was like, I saw this. They're like, who the heck are you to give me advice? And yet they don't say that out loud. I mean, up in New Jersey, they did more often. But here in the South, they are a little bit more like you can see from their face. So you have to build trust. But guys, we can't just label trust as this universal thing that's applicable everywhere. We trust people differently to mow our lawn or fix our cars or perform surgery. So let's start with this definition of trust and what trust is. And, why don't you grab that and answer that easy question?
Well, Wally has seen me in work that I've done with Wally and companies that he brought me into, right? I believe in this concept called levels of trust, right? There's a certain level of trust when I just know your name, right? Like I know some of my neighbors' names, but I don't know if I'm giving them the keys to my house when I'm out of town, right? There's different levels of trust when you're hanging out at a family reunion. Like, I don't think I'm going to tell them how much money I do or don't have because they might want some, but they'd never offer any if I needed it, right? Right. So I think I tend to think of trust as levels, and I think of it as the behavior and the relationship with that other person that causes me to extend or retract my level of trust. Wally?
Yeah, I like that. I like the levels that Dave talks about. I also think, in particular, in the business world, trust, at least from my perspective, it definitely is a critical currency in how we measure return on investment. And return on investment is not just dollars, it's not just metrics, it's people development and everything else, right? It's all the above. And I think you're correct, Dave. I think as we sit in different roles, as we work within teams, as we work in large corporations, small corporations, problem solving, trust is a massively critical element to move the ball forward. It can go backwards if you don't have it right. So it is an element that we need to seek. Whether you're an individual contributor or whether you're managing thousands of people, and it's how we communicate, how we talk, how we lean in, and where that vulnerability comes, I think is a little bit what you're talking about, Dave. So
Yeah.
I'm with.
Yeah, it's and we love comments. We're gonna each one of our LinkedIn lives. We've had lots of comments, and we actually answer them in real time. Trust us on that. And we're gonna even have a trust assessment that I created that we're gonna have at the end. It's a self assessment, and it's confidential, but it just allows you to go and even think about what trust looks like. See, they seem like such fundamental, basic concepts that everybody knows, but when you see the way people react, we know it's because of a lack of trust. So let's be really specific. Think about in business, right? Let's just decide because not everybody works in an enterprise at a Fortune 50 organization. But is there a difference first between trust at a large company or some of the smaller companies that you've either worked with or worked for?
Yeah, let me jump in, and
Yeah.
Dave jump behind me here. You know, I've worked in big companies, big automotive companies, but I also have my own consulting business, and so I'm working with small startup companies these days. And I grew up in the retail car business, which are very localized, independent business people, right? And while trust in the core foundation is, I think, very very much the same, how we try to grow trust, how we develop trust, and the obstacles around trust are quite different in a bigger, more complex, organization than they are in a smaller, more nimble, where everybody wears a lot of different hats, right? So if all of us are trying to make, I'll take auto because that's the world I come from, trying to make the dealership run, and it's a small store, some people do a lot of different jobs. They wear multiple hats. I think when you move outside of automotive into healthcare and other things like that, boy, we have to trust what we hear from our doctor, right? We have to lean in. Somebody's brought that up already in the comment section. It's really critical in that space. And at least for me, being old on this phone or on this video, I probably spend a little more time with doctors. People say you do that later in life. I do. If nothing else, just to stay really healthy. And so you lean in and you try to develop the trust, and you get lots of questions, lots of answers. I sometimes think Instagram takes us off our game because we listen to people that we don't know sometimes.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think there's something in that. I agree with you. Big versus small, but I'm going to try and go one depth further from where Wally just went, which is I think that it's more visible in small organizations than it is in big. In a big organization, it's a small ripple in the pond. It's a slightly missed quarterly earnings. It's a slight dysfunction in a team because we're big. So big covers up the impacts. In an organization of 50, 100, or 200 employees, when we fundamentally don't have trust between each other, that miss in a quarterly revenue objective is a wave. It's the boulder that dropped in the pond. It's team dysfunction because we only had so many teams, and this team was working on something critical, and now we missed a critical client objective or a project completion or an update of our software or something. And so I think in big organizations, we get used to it and we write it off as, well, they're just different and it's just hard, and it's hard to bring us all together. But the effect is the same across, which is it causes problems in achieving the business objectives in an organization, period, when we can't trust what we say in that meeting in our company.
Yeah, it's so prickly thinking about trust because there's just so many layers to it. So you talked about software updates, you talked about healthcare. It's hard to please everybody with trust at the level they expect. And I think understanding that you're going to miss certain software update deadlines. Or I've heard from healthcare and other things, if we don't get fives, or automotive business, there's not raises that go out because it's either you get a five or there's an issue and now everybody suffers for it. And these are stories that people have told me about why they have to game the system sometimes because it's this optics. So if trust is something you build, but it can be immediately lost because of something you do, let's talk about like how you would even work on understanding trust was broken and what to do when it is broken.
Yeah, it's a great angle because there's no doubt in the world you live in, and I agree with Dave. A bigger organization, it's easier to get numb to the small ripples in the communication and the relationship of things, across functional structures. Because the bigger the organization, the more people still work in somewhat silos, but yet it takes a team to put the ball over the end of the line. Sorry, I hang into sports analogies, but it does that. Whereas a smaller company, the nucleus, you really lean into each other, and it's more visible because there's fewer people. To your question, Mark, on where, if trust is broken, and trust can be broken in a cadre of ways, it takes a lot of good listening. It takes a lot of transparency. It takes the willingness to acknowledge, especially in management, it takes the willingness to acknowledge we called the play wrong. I mean, I can't tell you how many cases of where it's like, ooh, am I going to lose a bonus? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to get moved to a different job? However, that vulnerability, that humility, that stepping in, and then to rebuild, I think like most things, whether it's small or big, and certainly the larger, the more you involve the participants in success that are chasing the ROI and what you're trying to solve, the faster you rebuild trust. If it all comes from top down or comes laterally, there's 100 reasons why you may or may not trust it. If I'm involved in recovery to trust, if you will, use that word, recovery to trust. If I'm involved, if I'm engaged in that, I'm going to buy in deeper to where we take the next step.
Yeah, no, I think you're on target there, Wally, because that vulnerability, that willingness to, in a sense, apologize, to speak up, say something, is critical. When I see trust get broken in an organization, the first thing I always talk to leaders about is, can we talk about how it happened, and can we talk about acknowledging that, okay, there's something wrong in our ability to work together, right? Trust has to move beyond being a slogan or a statement. And we have to understand how each of us processes trust. And if I may, I just give you an example, right? So and don't laugh, I have a problem in my brain. When my brain hears somebody go, I promise I'll get that done. If they don't, my brain doesn't just go, oh, they missed the objective. I go, okay, they lied to me, right? I'm not saying my brain's processing it right, but if you work with me, I have to talk to you about how I process trust. And my team has to understand. So look, if you say we're going to get this done and we'll have it done by Friday at noon, that if you don't, and if you didn't communicate, and if you didn't go, hey, wait, we're in trouble, if you didn't make it so that we could all know in advance and understand, and we get to Friday at noon and it's not done, my brain goes, dang it, they lied to me. And so I try and help teams bridge whatever that translation is in their head that causes trust to break. And I think we have to be willing to do that as leaders and explain to our team, what does trust look like for me? How do I process it? And when it's broken, what do I start thinking?
It's great to know that people that process any information differently are going to receive what you do differently, right? And that's a great example of a promise broken because I said it was going to do that. It would be valuable to know in advance, but I don't think that's a conversation most people have, to say, hey, listen, when I hear a promise, I hear a statement, it's a promise, because that's what I do. When I make a statement and I put a deadline, I will deliver by that deadline.
Yeah, you never miss.
So the thing is that who really normally has that conversation? Because it seems so forward. It seems like in your face. But here's the thing. If you don't have conversations like that and it happens, now you're trying to repair something that could have easily been adjusted, setting the deadline out further, setting a draft at the first version to say, am I on target? Being able to have dialogue. It all starts with communication, which we've talked about in the past. If we don't communicate and set expectations, how can we even know when we're breaching trust? Because to us, shifting a deadline might not mean the same as someone else.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. It's these fundamentals that I think kick businesses' butts all the time. And when I watch how many resources they have, They have chief people officers and CHROs, and you got all these levels with these great people, and they got PhDs that are doing it. And you're looking to go, this is something that the smallest business has worked on and solved and understands how to scale it and work it. But you have all this infrastructure and you have the resources, but you don't address it. That to me is
Well,
astonishing.
if you go back to something Wally said, it's so much harder in a large organization. In an organization of 150, I can darn near gather everybody, right? Provided the geography works. But I can do what you just said, Mark, and go, okay, how do we fix this together? How do we get back into a trust circle together?
But Dave, here's the thing, right? And this is how this has been solved. And I want to push back to say an organization's made with humans, and humans have teams, and teams have sub teams. So I'm not saying the whole company has to have trust. What I'm saying is there can be a group like the three of us that work at the largest company in the world, but we have trust amongst us and our circle of influence. And there can be distrust in other places, but let's not lose it to the point where we actually lose who we are and get caught up in the large organization. Because I know that's what people are thinking. They're like, I have a big company. That sounds like a yeah, but I wrote a whole book on that.
That's true. That's true, Mark. It really is. At the end of the day, because you talked about CHROs and different things, and scale matters. And so trust, as we talked about in the beginning of this, in particular, it is the currency that has a significant impact on return on investment for any business, any organization, even if you look at ROI within your own family. Because again, ROI can be used a lot of different ways, right? It's not just dollars. It's, are we accomplishing our objectives and goals together? And to your point, staying small to some extent in that nucleus and making sure that organization, look at any sports team, they're a real tight nucleus, right? And they have to lean into each other to be successful. The bigger you go, the easier it is to get numb to those things. And actually the silos and verticals make it harder for even an outsider to look at a company and say, wow, why doesn't HR fix this? Well, HR doesn't run the business. The business side runs the business. HR is there to help get talent, train, help with compensation and benefits. But the bigger the organization, the more difficult. So again, at the top of the organization and down through the layers, a commitment to trust, a commitment to understanding transparency. If you've lost trust, and I mean, you can lose trust even in how you report quarterly statements to your team. Everybody's behind the rally cry. They stick behind the phrase that, whatever the mantra is or that we're chasing. But people will pick apart like, well, you said we were going to do this and we didn't accomplish that. We're going to deliver this software, but the vehicles still are not performing. So I'm getting my head ripped off every time I walk into a dealership because it's not working. Then you extend even further. What happens if you're in an organization that is not 100% self-contained? Again, I believe many folks on this call, on this video, don't just work in organizations that are small. They work in organizations that are very distributed. You have franchise partners, other kinds of partners that are not in the same geography. Contractually, you have to lean into each other and support each other. So the trust piece and how, to your point, Mark, how you deal with seeing the trust grow, fall, break, recover, and the commitment to that communication is really, really critical. Because once you break it, most people are going to sit back and say, well, I'm gonna pause for a second. Let me see if you can recover.
Mm-hmm.
In the automotive, if I'm a dealer and I have to lean into the brand franchise, I'm going to see does leadership carry us where they say they're going to carry us. At the same time, automotive companies don't, I shouldn't say this. There is a few automotive companies that sell directly to a consumer, but the majority don't. They sell through a distribution channel. They rely on each other. They need each other. So again, the trust, the whole theme of this around trust being the winning, the winning ROI, the key ingredient, helping teams that are disconnected and volatile change, all those things. It's really critical for transparency, communication. Leadership's got to be humble and come to the table and listen. They have to listen.
It's, what I keep hearing is resistance. So change resistance versus change readiness. People don't like change naturally. Many people, not everyone. And I think about change being like a yeah, but, right? We've done that before. Yeah, but I don't have time for that. And I think about all the yeah, but, what's the plan? And then you tell them the plan and they don't like the plan, but they'll go along with the plan, but they try to undermine the plan because you didn't build enough trust to hear that you got to tell your boss you don't like the plan, but he's going to find out anyhow. So I know there's a lot of variables that are here. I'm not an idealist where I'm like living in a fantasy world where I think everything's going to be well. I know that grassroots opportunities change organizations because I've been involved with that. I've taken large organizations, worked with small teams at massive companies and saw shifts. So, guys, we're talking about the auto industry, but there's lots of different industries. When you hear about, are people ready for change, and how do you do change with or without trust, right? Change readiness, change resistance, trust resistance.
Yeah. So if it's okay, I mean, I'm going to jump into something that all three of us are familiar with and believe, which is, the study of human behavior tells us that from a genetic predisposition, right, there are some of us who trust more quickly and trust more easily. And there are some of us who are more wired for, got to know more, give me the details, want to think about it, want to process it. So, and the population globally is a nearly 50-50 split, right? So when you talk about change management and trust in combination, right, there are people who accept change via trust quicker and easier in organizations. And the key is to have strategies ready for both, right? Have strategies ready for how do you get people to trust and buy into change faster? Involve them early, allow them to be part of what you're thinking about, allow them to process out loud. Yeah, but let them get that out of their system so they can be part of building the change in a way that doesn't have yeah, but come out later as a roadblock for them or others, but has it come out as part of a healthy discussion in a planning and design process, right? And I think all too often we, in organizations, large or small, and I serve everything from technology to healthcare to franchise organizations outside of automotive, right? And what I see is you give me a group of technology engineers who are working on the next iteration of software, and you go, hey, we need to, and I need new version, and let's go. And they look at you and go, whoa, 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 slow down. Why? Who said so? How do we know they're right? And you go to them instead and go, so I'd love you guys to be part of a feedback channel with customer feedback so that you can sort on it, you can think through it and decide, how do we respond to it? What do we agree with? What makes sense? And how do we create the next iteration for the next update? And watch the different response you get.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Participation's big. I think at the end of the day, Dave, where you go down that path, participation's big. And I think as you were talking about the earlier piece of that response from the standpoint of planning, it does have to be, you have to think strategically that you're going to get, you need the readiness for, kind of as Mark opened up this little bit of section of the conversation. And so you have to expect, redundancy is the wrong word, or I don't think is the right word, but in the end, you have to expect change is going to happen. Some of us will run toward it. Some of us don't want it to happen, and we hold back from it. But acknowledging and planning that way and putting in the right communication strategy, the right feedback loop, just to your point, a set of engineers, they want to know a lot more details than a salesperson. I'm a sales oriented person, and so I can fly with about 90% of the answer most times. I don't need 100%. I'll figure out the last 10% on the fly. But that's how I'm wired. The person sitting next to me may not be that wired that way. And if we're a team, we have to know that about each other So that way we
Yeah.
move forward, right? That's that lean in trust, whether it's a sports team, whether it's the military, doesn't matter. It can be healthcare. I mean, think about in a surgical situation, how all the people in that operating room trust what each does together and independently to create success for the patient. I mean, it's got to be amazing orchestration, right? And they're all thinking. Sometimes they're maybe speaking, sometimes not. They just know things are happening based on all the data feedback coming from the patient on the table, right? All the equipment, all the things, and it's like orchestra. It sounds well because they all play that role and they lean in. If you can think about how do you apply that in a world, knowing that something's going to happen, something's going to change, something's going to fall through. How do we recover and respond fast?
And it's interesting as we're talking about this. So people think, uh, yeah, in my organization, this is great, guys. Ideologically, this sounds fantastic. But here's what's really going on. Return to office. Are we really being trusted? Is that just a way to get rid of employees? Um,
Mm.
by the way, have to work more now than ever because they let go a lot of people and haven't replaced them. We have to go through something where I'm physically tired because I actually have parents to take care of or grandparents and or have littles at home. And people are like, well, wah, wah, wah. This is what happens. This is what goes on. But here's the
Oops, we just lost his sound.
Yeah, we'll keep going while we get Mark back.
Yeah.
Um, and but he's right on target with organizations can do things so easily, accidentally, unconsciously that interfere with trust. Um, I was laughing when he said, "Gosh, they want me to return to the office, right? Because they say I'm not productive enough at home, and I I think I'm working till 9 o'clock at night, except for the break I took for dinner to feed my kids or whatever." And it becomes really challenging organizationally when we don't explain, or in the case of Jamie Dimon, he did explain, right? He said, "Here's why I want people back in the office, because they don't do as much."
Yeah.
Wally?
Well, there's no doubt, and I think early in our conversation we talked about in bigger structures they may have a full HR team. Again, whether you do it inside the business unit or you do it with peripheral structures that are in the organization to help you listen, right? Again, return to the office makes total sense if you look at business through the way I see business, but it may not be that way with other people who have different challenges. How do we measure productivity? Is productivity because somebody is always online, or are they
Yeah.
actually producing something, right? I mean, how we measure that. And again, I do think I will say this: in all of my years, one of the things I always found the most valuable was doing cross diagonal, both level and structure discussions with staff members, in different levels, because you hear these things, right? And then it's my responsibility. It's like once I learn something, what do I do with it? Am I checking a box because somebody in management or HR asked me to do that? Or do I actually take a step? Do I take a step either with that individual or that function or how the functions connect together? So again, I love hearing across organizations, and I do think all three of us, that is how we help organizations. What is the problem they're struggling with? And you have to kind of get your arms around the context, but you have to listen, and you have to listen at different levels and different angles. What the corner suite wants to tell us, and I've sat in those kind of chairs. I'm going to tell you what I know you need to hear because I know the answer that I already want you to give me, but I'm going to pay you to tell me that. I already have
Yeah.
that, which is crazy, but we do that. That's what we do as a society. And some of the most productive organizations, somewhat organically, but intentional organically, listen and bring about software change, product development, talent development, because the organization is helping itself internally, right?
One of the questions that I know Mark had for us prepared for this part of it, Wally, was, okay, and so some of that trust gets, stretched people get tired, people question it, and he was planned to ask us to talk a little bit about, okay, if we're going to keep the trust as a thriving part of our culture, what's the number one thing that we'd at least share with this audience they ought to think about that keeps the culture strong around trust so that people don't burn out and their trust doesn't burn out? Is there any non-negotiable that we'd add in that conversation?
Well, I think, yeah, it's a great question. And I think not only to build culture, but to build the trust, management at the top, but even in layers into an organization, depending upon the size and scale, has to live it out. They have to walk to it. Which,
Yeah.
which in the old days, people used to laugh at me. They'd say, "You do this management by walking around. You're always, touching people and talking to people in the field and traveling." Well, that it always proved out that if I changed jobs, people would say, "Hey, can I come to your new organization?" Because I paid attention to the people that was on my staff. Now, I would say at the same time, I work for supervisors who would take a stick to my backside when I didn't hammer those people for hitting a particular result.
Yeah.
And I would always respond and say, I don't think a stick is the best thing. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be accountable. Doesn't mean you shouldn't push. So I think in the area of trust and transparency and the core, you got to live it out. And I do think constantly pulsing and hearing and paying attention to, as well as bringing staff in to participate in regaining trust, is super, super important. It's super important because you get more ambassadors, more people in the boat, rowing the boat in the same direction. And kind of law of large numbers says if I got more people rowing the boat in the same direction, we're going to go faster. Probably going to go straighter. So it's not complicated. It's hard to do because we have to be accountable to live it out.
Yeah. I know I've observed you do that. I can't tell you how many times when I got to have 10 minutes with you in a lunchroom back in the days of, the large lunchroom where people gathered, right? As you were walking around connecting. But I
One, two,
think
three,
what
four, five, six. Hey,
there
I'm
he
back.
is.
He's
I think
back.
what I isolate on that you said that I think it's important for people is the quality of the relationships you build are a big deal.
Yep.
And those quality of the relationships, yes, they do include the idea of I've got to just connect, go, listen. And they have to include the I live it out. I don't just talk about it. But the quality of the relationship that keeps trust thriving is that you stay active consistently in living it out. It's not just hey, we gathered or we did a Zoom and I talked. It's I'm consistent about the relationship. And when you ask me hard questions, to our friend Mark's credit, I don't say, yeah, but. Yeah, that's true, but I can't answer it right now. Or, yeah, I hear what you want to know, but I just don't have all the data yet. Right. And so as a leader, I don't get inconsistent with my willingness to build strong, transparent relationship. That's what keeps the trust going in hard, difficult times. Mark, welcome home.
Yeah, the trust triangle. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Connection, consistency, and clarity. So you mentioned it, but let's really tie this together. So if you talk about connection, which is empathy, which means I get you, and you talk about consistency, which is reliability, and I can count on you, and clarity is transparency, where you know where you stand and why. I mean, guys, let's dive into that because I think putting those three C's really helps people kind of alliterate, understand it, and act it out.
Yeah, those are to me. I love the triangle, and I think one of the things that always comes up is like, if you look at the triangle, what's the most difficult thing for leaders to do? And it probably doesn't change as much small organization versus big. Big, it's easy to lean into the excuse of we're doing a lot of things at 100 miles an hour, but the consistency side is tough, especially in size, because you're running at speed, especially multinational, multi-international type companies. You're working around the clock, whether you're doing engineering or business or whatnot. So I think the consistency, I think the connection truly for most leaders is a desire, right? That one's there. And I do think clarity sometimes can be a wobbly leg because in some cases, are are we in a place where the organization can absorb all the communication at once, or do we need to move them down the field to the end goal with the right set of information along the path, even if we're recovering trust? Just jumping from point A to point B. I had an instructor one time tell me, a person I work for said, Wally, one of your biggest challenges is you know where we need to go, slow down and back up and get your team to go along with you. That was one of the best pieces of advice I ever had from a leader, Mr. Heiss, who worked at General Motors. Said, just freaking slow down, dude. You're going too fast. You know the answer. You know where to go, but you need the rest of the team to help you get there. So slow down a minute. Slow down a minute. So.
Yeah, I agree with Wally.
I was adding another C there. That would be calming down, Wally, and start, taking. I mean, it's
calm down. Go ahead, Dave. Save me.
Dave.
Yeah, I know. I agree about consistency because organizational demands and change of organizational focus and objectives can pull us in directions where it inhibits our inconsistency. I think connection exists as a goal, but the larger your team gets, the higher you rise in an organization, especially when you get to a leader of leaders place in an organization. Connection becomes more challenging because you're working on those task-oriented, get-done, objective, KPI-focused sort of things. And we see organizations that focus more on, look, we got to get stuff done. Don't worry about taking them for pizza and a beer. Don't worry about being a pal. We got to hit objectives. We got to hit KPIs. And I think connection and the time necessary for connection becomes harder and more easily distracted. And for sure, the last 5 years of remote Zoom and Teams meetings have made true connection that used to happen literally in the break room when I noticed Wally looked a little down and I went, hey, Wally, what's going on? My daughter's soccer team lost at state. And I'm fine, but I'm dealing with helping an 18-year-old for the first time really work through something huge that she worked for that didn't happen. And you go, oh, I don't want to say it out loud, but I didn't know Wally had an 18-year-old. I knew he had a couple daughters, but right. And so true connection has just become harder in our digital environments.
Agreed.
Yeah, we didn't even get to go into the whole what happens with families, what happens with digital environment and hybrid environment. I mean, there's just so much to it because it's harder to build trust with people that you don't get to physically be in the room with. It's there's so much more to this, right? But hopefully these conversations come up, and imagine going to a coworker and saying, hey, this thing came up about trust. Like, how are we? Right? Like, I know we've worked together for 5 years. Like, where can I improve? What can I do to be better communicator? Like, where have I done something that maybe I fell short of your expectations and I never knew it? This would be great to have a conversation. Now, that takes some intestinal fortitude to be able to do it. But here's what happens if you don't. It doesn't mean it doesn't still exist. That's the thing about yeah buts. That's the thing about trust. Just because you don't talk about it doesn't magically make it disappear.
It doesn't go away. And I like the 3D approach because I think when you think about being a leader in any organization, sometimes it's good for us to remember and have something just visible, or, around our desk or, on the side of our laptop that it brings you back to these things so that you think about them. Doesn't mean you're going to act on them every hour of every day, but keeping it visible. I find my own self that if I can things that I really want to move the ball on, understanding how am I perceived trust wise, how am I perceived connection wise, just keeping it visible, Mark, is very helpful because I'll weave it into my conversations and I can take that feedback, I can adjust to it. I can spend more time. And Dave's correct. Remotes made things way more difficult, and it is a bigger challenge the further you go to the top of the ladder because you're dealing with people, you're running, and it doesn't mean that the people on the very front lines are not running because they're running their tail off, and nothing gets done without them. Nothing gets done without the frontline troops, and so it's imperative that we understand the trust factor from the bottom to the top, not the top to the bottom.
This is great points. And we have to land the plane or pull into the gate or whatever metaphor we're going to use. We're going to scan the car to make sure that it doesn't have any damage, reference to automotive rental companies lately. Talk about trust. So it's just very interesting, right? Lots of things people have said online about lots of different things. You have to monitor what's going on to understand what is noise, what's important. And you know what we talked about so many times was about just asking, or at least being aware. I believe 360s help because they're anonymous, but they provide such great insight that people can be more self-aware. I believe that predictive index has been helpful to understand how to communicate and understand behaviorally how to address people. I think that people use assessments, but then don't utilize them. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there's so many tools that are out there. And I was like, I just want people to be able to get the results that they're asking for. We have a desire consistently for what we want, but we don't utilize the tools. So we need reminders to remember about trust because we're thinking too much about profits or about what the new organization is going to do, or if you're going to be laid off. It's some of these things that keep us in business, having these curiosity questions to go and have this dialogue again and again to remind people, don't forget what's foundational.
Yeah.
And go ahead. You got something to say, Dave? Because I'm going to put my in the chat, and it might show up on different places. I have a trust builder self test that I
Nice.
created using using AI. So unapologetically use Gemini, and went and created a assessment. It's confidential. It's just for you. It doesn't go anywhere. But I wanted to put that out there because I thought it's interesting because if you just look at the questions, you're going to think, oh, this could have been breaching trust, which is what we talked about early on. Hold on, not doing a deadline, not showing up prepared for a meeting can be breaching trust?
Yeah.
Yes, it can. Go ahead, Dave.
No, I just appreciate doing these with you guys because I learned from each of you. Um, Mark's been a massive influence on me, not to say, yeah, but he's still trying to get me in full remission. But I encourage everybody to take it. Don't say, yeah, it would be cool to do, but
That's right. It'd be good to do. This is fun. This has been fun. These three series, we'll see what our next chapter is as we kind of step back and reconvene. We love doing this. I think all of us are getting feedback from different individuals that participate. And we just want to help. I think all three of us, I think we're better together as a team, and we can bring some pretty interesting solutions to those out there that need help. We got a number of years of experience, which is always good to lean into. And Dave and I don't have any hair, and Mark's got all the hair, so that's the other piece.
And you know what? The reason we do this as well is not to talk about our expertise, but to actually build trust. I'm unapologetically, this is who I am. So if you like me on LinkedIn, you're going to like me in person. And that's the same thing about each one of you guys. Like, this is who we are. I'm not trying to put on airs, neither of you guys, to be like, this is the way I interact. This is what I care about. This is how you build trust, but this is the way it used to be done in person with people, and you get to know them over time. I know people don't have time, so they have to compress time. So imagine having a conversation with us, and you get to answer questions and have questions asked and have that interaction to at least understand if it's not us, who else can help? Because that's what it's about, getting you the help you need, not just picking us because we happen to be available. So, guys, this has been great. Can't wait to do it again. And I like that LinkedIn is such a great platform for this that just makes it different. I can't imagine any of us doing a TikTok together. Please, no, ever. Okay, no.
Not good. Not good. All right, Mark, Dave, you
It's-
guys have a great, amazing week and close to the month of July for sure.
Yep, great. And thank you to our audience for being there.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you all.